I'm Iqbalur Rahman. I teach political science in the Department of Political Science of Department. I teach political science in the Department of Political Science of Aligarh Muslim University. And today, I am going to discuss with you the collective security system under the United Nations. Collective security system is a security model for maintaining international peace and security. The mechanism which United Nations has adopted, it is meant to manage the maneuvering of users of power which states utilize, use, exercise in their relationships against each other. The UN Charter contains explicit undertakings in the area of peaceful settlement of international disputes, and various instruments emerged over time as the UN sought to give operational meaning to the peace and security principles in the Charter. The United Nations adopted the notion of collective security, though the term collective security is not used in the charter of the organization. It used it as a security arrangement. This arrangement was to ensure that all of the states under the shadow of the United Nations would cooperate collectively to provide security to one another. The Charter refers to the determination of international community to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. It lays out various principles for the peaceful coexistence of its members and calls for the strengthening of the existing mechanism of cooperation to maintain international peace and security. In this regard, Article 1 of the Charter in particular especially refers to the United Nations taking effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of peace, and to bring about peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law and settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to the breaches of peace. The principles that are guide to the United Nations actions in the matters of collective security are spelled out in Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 of the Charter. Chapter 6 covers the Pacific settlements of disputes. It contains Article 33 to Article 38, and Chapter 7 deals with the action with respect to the threats to peace, breaches of the peace, and the acts of aggression. It consists of Articles 39 to 51. The articles embedded in Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 establish a foundation. Both these chapters lay down the legal foundation and moral legitimacy to enable a range of UN actions intended to maintain international peace and security. The role of the United Nations is activated by the Security Council, which responds to the requirements of members of the United Nations in voting and decision. The responsibility primarily is of UN Security Council in matters of collective security. In the enforcement of Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The United Nations Security Council, it consists of 15 members, 5 permanent members, and 10 non-permanent members. The permanent members are United States of America, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. In theory, the task of these countries includes applying the theory of collective security when there are emerging issues relating to three things: threat to peace, breaches of peace, and acts of aggression. Under Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter, the Security Council is entitled to investigate disputes and all other situations which may lead to such disputes. The Security Council may vote for appropriate procedures, what actions are required in order to keep peace and settlement using all possible ways, such as collective security procedures. These decisions can only be made by the consent of at least 9 members of the UNSC, and none of the 5 permanent members should object or vote against such decisions. This sets a limitation on the working of collective security system in United Nations. The peaceful settlements of disputes was seen as an essential element of avoiding armed conflict. Article 33 of the Charter identifies the various mechanisms that are to be used by the parties to a dispute seeking peaceful settlement through some kind of the mechanism which is available at the level of the United Nations and even outside the United Nations. Under Chapter 7, the Council has enough authorities to decide what procedures should be taken in case there are some situations where there are threats to peace, breaching of peace, or some acts of aggression against peace, people, or countries. In this case, the Security Council has the power to use armed force in order to keep or restore peace internationally. It is the United Nations Security Council that is charged with putting the UN collective system, putting the collective security system into practice. Within the UN structure, the founders made the Council the repository of great power reserved to maintain peace. This makes this body as the policeman of the system, serving as legitimizer and delegitimizer for the use of force internationally. The General Assembly is the main deliberative policy making and representative organ of the United Nations. Comprising of all members, around 103, 193 are the members of the United Nations. The General Assembly acts as a unique forum for multilateral discussion of international issues and make recommendation on subjects pertaining to international peace and security, including development, disarmament, human rights, international law, and peaceful arbitration of dispute between nations. Chapter 4 of the United Nations Charter contains the Charter's provision dealing with the United Nations General Assembly, especially its composition, functions, power, voting, and procedures. Article 10 of Chapter 4 gives the General Assembly power to discuss any questions or any matter within the scope of present charter and may make recommendations to the member of the United Nations or to the Security Council or to both on any questions or matters pertaining to issues to security and peace. Article 11 of Chapter 4, it tasks the UN General Assembly with considering principles governing disarmament and regulation of armaments and making recommendations. UN General Assembly is prohibited by Article 12 from making recommendation on matters currently being dealt with the UN Security Council unless requested to do so by the Council. However, this has not always prevented the General Assembly from attempting to not deal with threats to international peace and security in cases where the UN Security Council was deadlocked by using the framework of Uniting for Peace resolution, which was adopted in 1950 in the context of the Korean War. The assembly, where all states have a single vote and none wields a veto, typically plays a fiddle role, plays a second fiddle to the United Nations Security Council when it comes to dealing with the major crisis. Nothing in the present charter, dear students, holds the UN General Assembly not to take up issues of peace and security and help them resolve through peaceful means. The only exception is Article 12, which prohibits the General Assembly when the subject of threat to peace, breaches of peace, act of aggression is under the consideration of UNSC. It can make recommendations, but they are not binding other than the one made under Uniting for Peace resolutions. So, General Assembly plays a very active role in matters of peace and security. We cannot say that General Assembly is not a institution, not a organ. It is the primary organ of the United Nations. And the responsibility of peace for which the United Nations was created. If the Security Council is not in a position because of the structural things, the responsibility has had to be of the General Assembly, where all the members are represented, that it has to take up the questions of collective security and decide about it, try to enforce them. Here in this regard, I wish to make one important point regarding the collective security system, that the UN has no enforcement mechanism available to it. There are no forces which are under the United Nations Charter provides for it that there should be forces for this purpose to be made, to be created by the members of the United Nations. But this provision, which is part of the UN Charter, still remains unfulfilled. UN General Assembly, under the resolution which popularly is known as Uniting for Peace Resolution, states that in any case where the Security Council, because of a lack of unanimity among its 5 permanent members, fails to act as required to maintain international peace and security, the General Assembly shall consider the matter immediately and may issue appropriate recommendations to the United Nations members for collective measures, including the use of force when necessary. The resolution was designed to provide the UN with the alternative avenue for action when at least 5 permanent members uses its veto to obstruct the functioning of the UN Security Council from carrying out its functions mandated by the United Nations Charter. So this provision, this resolution gives authority to the UN General Assembly to play an active role to put into practice the ideals of collective security, the provisions of collective security, which United Nations has incorporated in detail in its structure. To facilitate prompt action by the General Assembly under this Uniting for Peace resolution, in case of deadlock, the resolution provides that the General Assembly can call an emergency special sessions. The General Assembly, under this provision, has so far convened up to February 2022 around 11 emergency special sessions. However, unlike the proceedings of emergency special sessions, the 10th emergency special session has been adjourned and resumed on numerous occasions over the past several years to remain adjourned. More than 10 separate meetings have been held by the assembly itself while sitting in the 10th RSS since 2000. The 10th emergency session, it concerned with the illegal Israeli action in occupied East Jerusalem and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. Point is that the Charter provides for collective measures under Uniting for Peace resolution, but because of the politics, this role of the General Assembly sometimes becomes limited. Other than the UN General Assembly, the Secretary General of the United Nations is a symbol of United Nations ideals, and he is the spokesperson for the interest of the world's people. The Charter describes the Secretary General as a chief administrative officer of the organization who shall act in that capacity and performs such other functions as are entrusted to them by the Security Council, General Assembly, Economic and Social Council, and other United Nations organs. What is relevant here to explain to you regarding the role of the UN Secretary General in matters of peace and security. This role of Secretary General is a very different one, very unique one. And it is the Secretary General of the United Nations who has been assigned this role. And that role is the Charter empowers the Secretary General to bring to the attention to the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. The guidelines provide to define the powers of the office and grant it considerable scope for action. The office of the Secretary General would fail if he did not take up the concerns of member states. So the responsibility which is imposed on him, which is made of him under the UN Charter in matters of peace and security, to bringing to the notice of the UN Security Council, makes this position of the Secretary General very relevant in the overall domain of the collective security system which United Nations provide to us, to itself, to deal with the issues of peace and security. Dear students, when it is said that the Charter provides to bring to the notice of Security Council any issue in view of the Secretary General, does not mean that this role is limited. The role is very extensive. The Charter does not prohibit the Secretary General to not to take up different roles, whereby through his own efforts, peace could be established, peace could be strengthened, and nowhere the charter prohibits this role of the Secretary General. Secretary General, this is the term which the UN Charter uses. Secretary General. And in fact, this depends upon the persona of the Secretary General. That what role in the capacity of Secretary General would prefer to take up. He can choose the role of Secretary and he can choose the role of General. Intermixing both makes the Secretary General a very viable option, very viable mechanism through which peace can be addressed successfully. What I need to make you understand here, that the Secretary General, the past one, Dag Hammarskjöld, Kofi Annan, very prolific personalities. They contributed a lot through their personal efforts in serving the cause of peace and security. So I'm repeating it. The Charter does not prohibit that the Secretary General independently, other than the guidance and roles assigned to him by either by the General Assembly or the Security Council, he, in his personal capacity, can take up different roles in the form of diplomacy, negotiations, arbitrations, and various associated ways whereby through him peace could be addressed, peace could be established, conflicts can be avoided. So, General Assembly, Secretary General, they also, in the framework of collective security mechanism, they play very important roles. The UN collective security system is a very robust system. It is not like which was incorporated in the League of Nations. The veto power available to the 5 permanent members, it ensures that no collective action can ever be instituted against any one of them. This makes the United Nations what we can say a limited collective security system. But this does not appear to be appropriate to categorize because of the fact that they have the veto power. The fact is this, that when the United Nations was made, in its formulation itself, the idea that peace cannot be achieved without the cooperation of great powers, and unless there is cooperation among them, the collective security measures at United Nations Security Council forum cannot be decided. The enforcement matters under the collective security system adopted by the UNSC, though proved not very successful. That would be the subject of discussion in some other lecture. This could not serve as a justifiable reason to criticize that UN is not a successful organization. UN is an ineffective system of collective security. Collective security still remains one of the most promising approaches for peace and credible mechanism for power management in international system. Here, dear students, I would prefer to bring to your knowledge the assertion of second UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld. He says that the organization was not created in order to bring us to heaven. I am again emphasizing. The organization was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from hell. These words of him are instructive of the role of the United Nations we expect from United Nations. Other than the robust system which it has incorporated in its charter in dealing with the matters of peace and security, and the different authorities, different organs have been empowered to deal with the issue of international peace and security. It has evolved itself into a very extensive, comprehensive system which addresses the issues of many concerns. One of them is peace and security, but the rest of the others which it addresses, they indirectly contribute to peace. And the UN offers comprehensive solutions to problems of peace and security. The organization adopts new international legal norms, structures and processes for international cooperation, and provides a platform for diplomatic contacts, international discussion, meetings and conferences. Through its works, the UN creates conditions for the peaceful settlements of disputes. This organization promotes peace by all its actions. It makes efforts to protect human rights, undertakes preemptive diplomatic measures, provides electoral assistance and supports to democratization, promote economic and social development, provides humanitarian assistance, works on the repatriation of refugees, helps restore public infrastructure and facilities, and the reconstruction process. United Nations, dear student, is not a word government. We cannot describe it as a government, but we can describe it as a global governing system. It has created the institutions, and we see that the UN, through these institutions, is addressing the issues which are of concern to all of us. So, actions and joint actions. UN is the system which actually is serving, helping us not to face the scourge of war. War happens, but limiting the war, its effects, it is done by the United Nations. Wars cannot be completely outdone. They have to be with us, but their limitations had to be organized, and the United Nations is the system which very actively is serving this cause. So, with this statement, that what we see today is that the shift is from collective security towards global governance. So in United Nations, what we see that from limitation to global governance, it is the institution which plays a role. We need to understand, we need to know about, so that we can just make out what United Nations actually is doing for the whole of the humanity, for the whole of the society of the states. For today, this is all. Thank you.